any further ado, therefore, I would call on the Honorable Camillo Gonsalves to bring the feature address and declare the launching of this I-squared competition. Minister Gonsalves.
Thank you very much, and good morning. As is his wont, I've been upstaged again by Dr. Thompson. And having listened to all of the wonderful statements, beginning with Ms. Murphy's and ending with Dr. Thompson's, there's really very little that I have to say. Because a lot of what I thought were original ideas have already been expressed better than I could express them by some of the earlier speakers. I also thought that I would be speaking to a room full of students. And unless the schools have changed their entry requirements, I suspect that there's a different audience here than I originally anticipated. And I also note that we're already a bit over schedule and over beyond our time, and I'm now competing with refreshments and people's hunger. So I will do what is uncommon for people in my family, and I'll try to be brief. The Idea and Innovation competition is one that I'm very excited about, and I'm glad that I had an opportunity to be here at this launching of the I-squared competition. And it is, as everyone has already explained, critically important to engage the youth in the development of innovative solutions to some of the problems that continue to vex us in our public service. And it's difficult to teach old dogs like me new tricks, but I think that the youth, of course, are a font of innovation and new tricks. And all we have to do, as Ms. Murphy said, is provide the correct environment for that innovation to grow and to flourish. There is importance also in ideas, idea creation, and idea sharing. You know, they say, the quote is that if I have an apple and you have an apple and we exchange apples, we still only have one apple each. But if I have an idea and you have an idea and we exchange them, we both have two ideas. And we need to build our economy and our development not only on the creation of ideas, because everyone has ideas, but the exchange of ideas, because that will grow our collective knowledge and that will help us to refine the ideas that we ourselves have. It's also true that in developing countries, the lack of money is not an obstacle to innovation. It is the lack of ideas that is an obstacle to innovation. The ambassador for Cuba is here, and this is a wonderful example to talk about innovation, because Cuba has been subject to an illegal blockade for a number of years. And those countries that subjected Cuba to that blockade thought that they could bring Cuba to its knees by virtue of the restrictions that they placed on Cuba. But it is the innovation of the Cuban people and the ideas that they came up with to confront that. Of course, necessity is the mother of invention, but it is the ideas that the Cuban people came up with and their own innovations that allowed them to not only survive, but thrive in the face of this sort of a blockade. And that is the sort of inspiration that we should draw. Not every idea, not every innovation has to be some whiz-bang, techie, digital sort of an innovation. Sometimes it can be a very simple idea. But if one is faced with the need to innovate, one will innovate. And I'm glad that the NTRC has created an incentive for young people to innovate with these very rich rewards for the prizes. I think if in my quick math sitting there, it looked like you're giving away $20,000 in prize money. I hope that Searchlight which is the only private sector company there, is contributing somewhat to that pot. But in creating that incentive, we hope that we can get young people to contribute meaningful and real ideas in this initiative. Look, let's be clear. While, by and large, we have an effective and hard-working public service, no one here will contest the fact that the speed and the convenience of many of the services provided by our public service to the citizenry leave a lot to be desired. The trend has been to improve customer service and to both centralize certain services within a single location and also decentralize them across the country. But there's still too much standing in line. There's still too much running from one building to another to complete a single task. And there's still too many seemingly incomprehensible bureaucratic processes that we have to subject ourselves to. And oftentimes we say, well, why do I have to do it? I understand you're telling me I have to do it, but why do I have to do it? And the explanation is very often, well, because that is the done thing. But it is the young people who will ask the necessary questions to circumvent processes that probably made sense at some point, but no longer applicable in our current context. There's still too much having to leave your home and to travel by a bus or even a boat to accomplish fairly mundane tasks within our governmental service. And that is where students and technology come into play. They're the ones with the fresh eyes. They're the ones who can build upon previous and ongoing reforms in the public service. And they're the ones to question why things continue the way they have continued. They're the ones whose job it is now to ask why and to ask, how can I make this better? Every line is an opportunity for improvement. Anytime young people see 10 people standing in line, that's an opportunity for them to innovate themselves and innovate us as a government out of that problem. Every interaction between the public sector and a citizen is an opportunity for change. And not change just for the sake of change, but change that will yield improved speed, efficiency, savings, or an improved customer service experience. Dr. Thompson mentioned that mobile service penetration in St. Vincent and the Grenadines is now over 130%. When you think about it, because 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds don't have telephones, that really means that all of us have 2 phones on average. And a penetration of 130% is greater than the penetration of mobile phones in the United States, where it's only 101, 102%. So we have more phones in St. Vincent per capita than the most developed economy in the world. And that is now, for good or for ill. I mean, we can talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But for good or for ill, that is now one of the primary modes of communication between and among Vincentians. And there's no reason why it should not be a primary mode of communication between and among Vincentians and their government and public service. If mobile phones are the primary mode and most common basis of communication in St. Vincent and the Grenadines today, governments must adapt to that fact and harness that potential. Now, it's true that not all of the phones are smartphones. They're not all Blackberries, and they're not all iPhones, and they're not all Samsung Galaxy Android phones. But they have even the simplest phone. Let me use an example. When I was in the late 80s, the first computer I had, was called a Commodore 64. I don't know how many people remember the Commodore 64 or the TRS-80 and these sorts of machines. When I was getting my first computer, Luke, you were changing your first diaper. Youth is a very elastic concept when people talk about youth here. But the Commodore 64, which took up my entire desk, had a 1 megahertz chip. Not gigahertz, megahertz. And 64 kilobytes of RAM. Not megabytes, kilobytes. In fact, it was bragging that it had so much memory. It put the memory in the name. It's the Commodore 64. It could display 16 colors on the screen. 16 colors. And when I had that computer, I thought I was the most advanced person in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now today, the average smartphone will have a 1 gigahertz, 1.2, 1.3 gigahertz dual-core chip, which places it hundreds of times more powerful than my Commodore 64 computer. It would have probably up to 64 gigabytes of memory, which would be hundreds of times more memory than that computer. It would display high-definition video. Not 16 colors, millions of colors. It will have a video camera. It will have a still camera. And what it tells you is that now with this level of mobile penetration, using my Commodore 64 as a base, every Vincentian of age is carrying a computer in their pocket. So we need to not just think of them as phones. And these are things that also have access to the internet and access to one another. So these are computers that you're carrying in your pockets. Even what you would call a dumb phone has the ability to communicate by text with other phones and communicate in ways that was not possible 10 years ago. And it is the youth who are familiar with this technology, having grown up with it, having been born plugged in, and it is a natural part of their life, and they're the ones who will be able to think of ways to integrate the computers in their pockets with the sometimes still antiquated service in the public. It's not unheard of still, sir, for data to be stored in drawers in the public service. And it is the youth who will innovate their way if we give them the opportunity to a more advanced public service. Look, there's a story that has been in the news a lot recently about a leader who fired his secretary. And a lot of people have been playing political games with it. But the most incredible thing to me in that story, setting aside the politics of it, was that the root of the dispute with this gentleman and his secretary was that the innovation he was asking her to do in their workplace was to use a vote book. How in 2013 can this be an innovation? That was the question that came to me. Why aren't we talking about Excel? Why aren't we talking about computer-based accounts? Why is the innovation that someone is trying to introduce into the workplace the use of a vote book and an account ledger and in and out and written text? That this is not a serious way to innovate. But that is because, as I said at the beginning, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But young people will be able to innovate. And a young person's answer to an accounting problem would not be let us go and fetch a bound vote book and a good ink pen and write something that we can store in a locked drawer. That would not be the young person's approach to improving. And that is why we need to harness the young people to come up with real solutions to the problems that we still face. There's a wonderful book called Citizenville by a former San Francisco mayor. Now he's the deputy governor of California. His name is Gavin Newsom. And he talks about how government can more effectively and efficiently solve its problems. And he writes at one point, and I'll quote him briefly, that a government that can more effectively solve its problems is one that makes use of social media, networks, peer-to-peer engagement, and technological tools. And he says that government should open up the vast databases that they have to the legions of young people and third-party developers who can access and interpret that data in a more useful manner. Now, he even says that meetings such as this are probably more effective in social media and online, where you can get a bigger crowd in a room and communicate better than we are doing currently. Now, of course, Apollo will allow me to digress here, because this is a point I make whenever I speak as minister on this technological issue. The reason we are still meeting in this situation, and the reason we all held our breath when the video froze when Dr. Thompson was speaking, was because our internet in St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains overpriced and underfunded, underpowered. And the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has done excellent work by any measure in placing the hardware in the hands of young people. People have laptops. All primary school students have laptops. By early next year, all students, full stop, will have laptops. We talked about mobile phone penetration, but we are still hampered, stymied, handicapped, obstructed by the fact that our internet, our broadband internet, is the slowest in the region and also the most expensive in the region. And when we are going forward, I hope that one of the ways that all of you will judge me, if we meet again this time next year, is whether or not we still have a maximum internet broadband speed of 4.4 gigahertz, and we're paying $300 for it. But we hope that we can reduce the barriers to access and provide opportunity for all in such a way that the youth can more affordably innovate in the way that we want them to innovate. Now, the job, of course, is to harness innovation in the interest of improved governance and citizen access. The idea is not to make the government a clone of some private sector entity, because there are things that governments and public services do, like guarantee fairness and equality of access, that don't factor into profit and loss calculations. So the idea is not to reduce the public service to the status of a private sector entity, but the idea is for the young people to look at the bottlenecks and think of innovative and affordable ways to circumvent those bottlenecks. And the reason why it is important for the youth, not only is it true that the youth have new ways of looking at problems and are new and innovative thinkers, but the fact of the matter is that the wealthy and the powerful and the experienced can always find ways to circumvent bottlenecks and create efficiencies. Rich, powerful people not standing in half these lines that Joe Public is standing in. They send a bearer to stand in the line to deal with the problem, and they just know that at the end of the day the problem is resolved. But it is the test of a public service's efficiency the true test, is the manner in which it engages with the poor and the elderly, and yes, the youth, who would not have the money or the power or the connections or the access to make an inefficient system efficient for them personally. And so we hope that, since Bob Marley says, who feels it knows it, the youth who feel it will also know it and know how to fix it in the interest of all Vincentians. When you look at these e-government type competitions elsewhere, you see that the general theme is to avoid lining up. A lot of the apps, a lot of the things that are created are to avoid lining up. Ms. Murphy talked about passports, the trouble to get a passport. Many of us in this room have applied for a U.S. visa, and we see that much of that process is an online process that cuts down the flight time and the lining up time. There are apps currently in governments in developing countries for students to get their exam results, to pay your electricity and water bill, to make new electricity and water connections, to access your health services and your health records, to track packages in the post, to register and file complaints with the government, to give information about abandoned cars, about dangerous potholes, about areas that need to be cleaned up. A lot of the apps provide opportunities for people to pay their bills, all of their taxes, all of their licensing and regulatory fees from their smartphone. There's an app designed by students in the United States that the fire service, the fire department is using. It tells them where the nearest fire hydrant is. It tells them the design of buildings, where the fire exits are in the buildings. These are things developed by young people and students. There are public meetings calendars that list all public meetings that the government or that the state agencies are having in a given week and the location of these meetings, so that citizens can know where they can go to hear what is happening in their government or to make their voice heard in the government's business. There are professional license searching apps where you can see if your doctor or your plumber is a licensed contractor. What is the status of their license? Your cosmetologist, whatever the government is issuing licenses for, there are apps that can search these things for your own knowledge and safety and security. And it is a priority for us here in this room, for the educational officials and for our students to be inspired by these examples and those ideas to further integrate technology into our own governance. Not to be cute or cool or hip, but to effect changes that will enhance the citizen experience in their interaction with our government. What about, and I hope if any of these ideas win, I get a cut of but what about something to tell us about scholarship availability for students and streamlining the application process? Why must they trope down to a building to look at a bulletin board? Or why must they be pulling it from different websites to wonder where a scholarship is? What about job vacancies? Why can't we have a centralized database of government job vacancies instead of going to the NTRC website for an NTRC vacancy and the Ministry of Education website for a Ministry of Education vacancy? What about our wonderful National Library? How can we make the library more accessible and its works more accessible via some sort of app or online process? What about frequently asked questions? Something as simple as that. You'd be surprised how often government officials have to answer the same questions over and over again. And it's not the questioner's fault. It's that the answers are not available somewhere else. So they have to come and ask them each time. Is there a government directory where the citizen can know where to find the number, the email address, the contact information of the relevant government officials in a single place? How do we access our Hansard? There are parliamentary debates, but if you miss it, it's gone. There are other countries where you can access these sorts of things via an app or online. My own ministry in Consumer Affairs and Trade, you'll see in the newspaper sometimes that we publish prices, that this is the place that has the cheapest condensed milk, and this is the place that has the cheapest rice. Well, imagine if you were about to walk into Graves or Save-A-Lot or Super J, and you could pull that up on your phone to see whether or not you're in the right place to buy the right thing. These are things that we can do, and do effectively and cheaply, and those are ideas from an old brain. There are many ideas that young people will come up with that will be far more exciting and implementable than those. Ideas can be life-changing. Sometimes all you need to open the door is just one more good idea. And that's what we're looking for here. One or two more good ideas that can open doors of access. The young people should know that this is not their mother's and father's public service. It is theirs. They should also know that a theme of the incumbent government is that they must own the government. They heard it over and over again, own the government. Well, this is your opportunity to own the government and to reshape the public service in your own image. I urge all the young people and all the people here to urge young people to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity. I thank the NTRC again for conceiving of this idea, and I wish it all the best success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Gonsalves. That was certainly an exciting, thought-provoking, frank, and practical sharing of ideas.